Okay, here's what we actually know. Human babies are the most helpless newborns of any large mammal on Earth. They can't walk. They can't grip. They can't even regulate their own body temperature. For the first year of life, they are biologically speaking a liability. Well, liability is harsh, but the biology doesn't soften the point. And yet, for 300,000 years, our ancestors kept almost all of them alive. Without hospitals, without formula, without any of the things we now consider basic. So, what did they actually know that we've since forgotten? Number 7. Better teeth, worse civilization. Hunter gatherer children had better teeth than you do. Better than most kids alive today, and almost certainly better than Bronze Age children, the ones who came after the agricultural revolution, which we have since celebrated as the Great Leap Forward. Here's what archaeologists keep finding: Paleolithic children's teeth show almost no cavities. Bronze Age children's teeth are riddled with them. But teeth are just the visible record. The real story is nutrition. Hunter-gatherer children ate from an extraordinarily diverse range of plants: roots, nuts, tubers, and proteins. That variety meant their immune systems were constantly being trained, their bone density was higher, and their bodies were more resilient. They chewed tough, fibrous food throughout childhood, which drove jaw development and kept bacterial populations in check. Then farming arrived, and grain took over the diet. Soft ground fermentable grain that bacteria thrive on. But beyond the teeth, the narrower diet meant fewer micronutrients, more vulnerability to infection, and children whose bodies were running on a far more limited fuel supply than anything their ancestors had known. The agricultural revolution didn't just change what our faces look like, it changed how well children survived. The teeth are just the part that fossilizes. The first time I saw the comparative dental data, I thought it must be a fluke. It wasn't. Your orthodontist's entire career is in a meaningful sense the legacy of wheat. But diet is one thing. The harder truth is what happened when a child still didn't make it, no matter how well the community fed them. Number 6. Grief. This old has a name. Between 30 and 50% of ancient infants didn't survive their first year. That number held steady across most of human prehistory, and it didn't come down significantly until the 20th century. You'd think that kind of loss would eventually harden people, that grief would become background noise. It didn't. At sites across Europe, the Near East, and Africa, some dating back 34,000 years, archaeologists keep finding infant burials prepared with obvious care. Ochre-stained bones, shell beads, small tools placed beside tiny bodies. At Sunghir in Russia, two children lie buried together, covered in more than 10,000 hand-drilled ivory beads. Each one took roughly 45 minutes to make. That's around 7,000 hours of work. Almost a year of one person's entire waking life, given entirely to making sure two children didn't leave without ceremony. They weren't too busy surviving to grieve. They were grieving as part of surviving. They buried their children the way we bury ours, with care, with ceremony, with the understanding that this life mattered. Grief is as old as love. And number 5 is about what they did to ensure fewer of those graves ever needed filling. Number 5. Born holding on. If you touch a newborn's palm, they grip. Hard. Immediately. It's the palmar grasp reflex, and evolutionary biologists consider it a holdover from an earlier stage in our primate ancestry when infants needed to cling in order to stay close and survive. The circumstances changed. The reflex didn't. Ancient humans used it. Babies were carried constantly against the body during movement throughout the day. Not as a comfort strategy, as a survival strategy. Well, both, honestly. But survival came first. A crying infant on the open savanna is a signal to every predator within earshot. In 1986, two pediatric researchers, Hunziker and Barr, found that supplemental carrying reduced infant crying in Western babies by 43%. Supplemental carrying meaning extra hours of physical contact throughout the day. 43%. Our ancestors didn't need a study to figure that out. They figured it out over hundreds of thousands of years of trial error and honestly not getting eaten. Modern baby carriers are precision engineered objects. Theirs was a strip of animal hide. And the outcome, a calmer, safer infant, was exactly the same. Number 4. Mouth to mouth. What I'm about to describe was standard practice across essentially every human culture anthropologists and archaeologists have studied. It sounds pretty alarming by modern standards, and I'll be upfront, it involves saliva. Multiple peoples. Ancient humans chewed food before giving it to their babies. Mouth to mouth. Pre-digested, pre-softened, passed directly from adult to infant. It's called pre-mastication, and it wasn't some isolated tribal oddity. Everywhere researchers have looked, they've found evidence of it across cultures, continents, and thousands of years. Yes, it sounds deeply unhygienic. By modern standards, it is. But recent research into the infant microbiome suggests that the transfer of adult saliva, which carries hundreds of bacterial species, may have played a role in seeding the infant gut. Building immune tolerance. Introducing microbial diversity exactly when the immune system is still figuring out the world. What looked like a lack of options may have been an accidental masterclass in early immunology. Your ancestors literally chewed your food for you, and it might have made you healthier. You're welcome. Number 3. The village was the strategy. Every other great ape raises its young in a pair or alone. Gorillas, chimps, orangutans, mother and offspring with maybe some peripheral group presence. That's the default for our closest relatives. Humans are the exception. Evolutionary anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy made the case, and her 2009 book Mothers and Others is genuinely one of the most important works in the field that among the great apes, humans alone raise their young cooperatively. The group actively invests. Infants get passed between caregivers. If you're not the biological parent, it doesn't matter. You help, you feed, you carry, you comfort. The Aka, a hunter-gatherer people living in the rainforests of the Congo Basin, are one of the clearest living examples. Studied extensively by anthropologist Barry Hewlett, Aka fathers spend roughly 47% of their time holding or within arm's reach of their infants, one of the highest rates of direct paternal involvement ever recorded in any human population. On average, an AKA infant has 14 different regular caregivers. 14? Not 2? 14. Modern parents are out here trying to do the same job with one partner, a group chat, and a lot of unsolicited advice from strangers on the internet. Our ancestors had an actual system. We dismantled it and called it progress. Which brings us to number 2. Number 2, what we broke. Parental burnout isn't a personal failure. It's a design flaw, and a pretty predictable one once you understand the biology. No other primate species tries to raise offspring in complete social isolation. The nuclear family, 2 parents, 1 household, no extended network, is a modern invention, not a biological baseline. It runs directly counter to everything our evolutionary history prepared us for. A 2023 study from Cambridge looked at Bayaka hunter-gatherers in the Congo Basin. Nikhil Chaudhary and colleagues found that infants in these communities were in near constant physical contact with multiple caregivers throughout the day. They were rarely left alone. They rarely needed to cry. Caregiver burden was distributed across the group in a way that made individual exhaustion almost structurally impossible. The modern model looks quite different: an isolated household, a primary caregiver who often goes the entire day without adult contact, expected to stay responsive through the night and do it all again the next morning. Postpartum depression rates in isolated Western populations run between 10 and 15%. In communities with dense social support, they're dramatically lower. We didn't upgrade parenting. We optimized it for a different goal: privacy, autonomy, the nuclear household, and paid for it with our well-being. But all of those methods, the diet, the proximity, the shared care, they were only possible because of one thing. And that's number 1. Number 1. The smartest evolutionary trick. Menopause doesn't get much airtime in conversations about survival. which is strange because it may be the piece that made every other method on this list possible. Humans are one of the only mammals in which females live long past their reproductive years. Most female mammals stay fertile until they die. Humans stop, and then they keep living for decades. For a long time, scientists assumed menopause was just biological noise, an accident, a system winding down. Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah challenged that. Studying the Hadza of Tanzania, she noticed something consistent: post-reproductive women were among the most productive members of the group. They foraged efficiently, gathered more food than they consumed, and then distributed that surplus across the community. Not just to their own grandchildren, but to any child who needed it. They carried infants while mothers foraged. They passed on knowledge of which plants were edible and which seasons were lean. They watched, they taught, they fed. In practice, they were the backbone of the entire childcare operation the community depended on. This is the grandmother hypothesis, introduced by Hawkes in 1997. Menopause, rather than being a malfunction, freed women from the demands of pregnancy and nursing so they could redirect that energy into something else entirely. The fact that their grandchildren survived at higher rates and carried their genetic legacy forward, that's the evolutionary explanation for why the pattern persisted. But it wasn't a goal. It was a consequence. What these women were actually doing was what experienced people in any community do: they showed up and helped. Without them, human childhood, the longest developmental period of any primate, may never have been viable. We couldn't afford to be born this helpless, grow this slowly, and need this much care without people in the group who had the knowledge and the capacity to carry part of that weight. Evolution looked at grandmothers and said, too important to retire. What our ancestors knew that we've since forgotten is actually very simple. No child survives alone. And for 300,000 years, no one expected them to.